The early 2000s. What comes to mind when you hear that term? Kids network television? Your school years? Those poorly made nostalgia bait YouTube shorts?
Just found the Bowser room.
So nostalgic.
Children went missing here.
Wow.
Discovering Dad's ancient relic.
Yippee.
Eating the discontinued goop.
Yummers.
Well, for me personally, I think of those lame forgotten toy fads that so desperately wanted your parents' hard-earned dollar. Most of them not really lasting too long, with others being so obscure you've probably never even heard of them. Now there's gotta be some truth to that claim. For every silly Bands or Zuzu Pets, you have your Mighty Mugs or your Mighty Beans. Does anyone remember those? Mighty Beans? Anyway. Now, sometimes, much like a really bad movie, sometimes something can become so obscure, it wraps back around to becoming infamous. Now that probably doesn't make too much sense when I say it out loud, but believe me when I say you will understand what I mean quite soon enough. Now with all this in mind, today I want to dive back into an internet subject that's since been forgotten. Seem to be on a roll with that, haven't I? Well, what can I say? I'm a glutton for making unfinished internet business my business. Today's topic is no exception. You've probably already seen the title of this video, so let's quit beating around the ugly toy bush. Let's talk about freaky flickers.
In the beginning, there were just toys. Until Freaky Flickers! Each crazy character has its own cool look. They bounce, spin, and slide. You can collect all 40 Freaky Flickers.
Freaky Flickers, for those unaware, was a toy line from 2006 to 2010 that was created by and I'm quoting the Freaky Flickers wiki archive here, quote, an out-of-touch older man hoping to start the next big toy fad. And they aren't too far off. That old man being none other than Peter Ganter. Who's Peter Ganter, you may ask? Well, he's someone that's going to be quite prominent in today's video, as he's essentially the creator of the Freaky Flickers brand and the sole reason why I'm making today's video. You see, Peter had high hopes for Freaky Flickers. It was essentially a game where, I actually have no idea. How the hell were you supposed to play this? This might explain why the brand just never really panned out. They don't really explain how the game is supposed to be played. I guess by judging by the extremely limited screenshots of the actual board, you just flick the fugly looking flicker homunculi in this target and you rack up the most points. I don't know, man, I'm just spitballing here. The reason why I bring the toys up as much as I am is because they're actually really crucial in understanding the meat and potatoes of today's topic. Because yes, despite me rambling about cheaply made plastic toys, today's topic is much more well known for its failed film adaptation. Freaky Flickers, Quest for the Golden Flicker. Why don't we dive right into that, shall we?
Gather round, kiddies and flickers. I be telling a tale to curdle the blood and shiver the spine.
I should probably explain the plot real quick. Luckily, a detailed premise has been given to us via the official Freaky Flickers website. It states the following.
Meet the Freaky Flickers, tiny plastic marvels created by inventor and scientist Doc Flick by accident in his laboratory. Each imbued with unique personalities and abilities, they quickly made themselves useful around Doc's lab until soon they were all like a family. But all is not well at Casa de Flick, as Doc has fallen way behind on the mortgage and the bank is literally beating down his door, demanding their due. Now, Arg the Pirate, leader of the Freaky Flickers, has organized his most trusted mateys to join him in search of the rarest flicker of them all,
The Golden Flicker.
to help pay off Doc's debt. Join the Flickers as they adventure far and wide searching for the fabled
Golden Flicker.
from the edge of the world to an uncharted island, through the gullet of a whale, and even into outer space! No distance is too far, no joke too silly, and no adventure too great for this wacky, fun-loving, and downright freaky bunch. Freaky Flickers' Quest for the Golden Flicker is an action-packed adventure visualized in computer animation, but inspired by such cartoon legends as Tex Avery and Chuck Jones, promising fun for the entire
family.
That sounds delightful. With this premise in mind, it's worth mentioning that Quest for the Golden Flicker didn't originally start out as a feature-length film straight from the fiery depths of hell. In fact, initially it started life in 2006 as a pitch for an animated TV series. The pilot script was written by a man named Cary Howe. Not much is known about Mr. Howe, aside from him being a somewhat prominent special effects and makeup artist on films such as 1988's Critters and 1986's Friday the 13th New Blood. Cary landed a job at Peter Ganter's then company, Toys Toys Toys, at the time of the script's conception. eventually pitching Peter the idea of said cartoon series. Towards the end of 2005, I was working at a company called Toys, sculpting characters for a toy line called Freaky Flickers. I put together some test shots and pitched a possible TV series featuring the characters. I wrote the first draft of a half-hour script in late January of 2006, then hand-built our first computer, a 3200 Athlon shuttle box. So after sticking duct tape, bubblegum, and popsicle sticks to his computer setup, Gary was hard at work getting the animation for what would be the pilot episode together, with Peter funding the production. Eventually, Carrie expressed that the production would probably work better as a 90-minute direct-to-video feature, with him and Gary forming an agreement to split the proceedings and merchandise. For the entire year, I modeled, animated, and rendered on the same machine. I expressed my need for voice tracks early on, but it was late May 2007 before the first tracks were recorded. Less than 3 minutes had been rendered by the time of the VO session due to a single slow machine setup. After the first voice clips were added, I proposed expanding to a 90-minute feature. It took a little convincing, but we, Mr. Ganter and I, came to an agreement to make it a feature and divide the proceedings of the film and film merchandising. Yes, sounds simply marvelous. Gary gets to make the 90-minute feature he wants, and Peter gets more exposure to his tiny yet optimistic toy brand. What could possibly go wrong? During September of 2007, things were starting to become a bit more hectic. Carrie was having a hard time with the shitty computer station he was animating the film on, and was barely scraping by with the funds Peter had given him. On top of that, VOs were getting extremely rushed due to the aforementioned budget constraints, and Carrie's lack of time due to spinning so many plates and doing everything else. It had gotten so bad that the recording sessions that Carrie ended up doing with the hired actors only lasted about 2 hours per VA, to the point to where Carrie would eventually call this method speed acting. Labeling a blatant problem as a method of directing during production is so funny to me, I don't know why. Thanks to this wonderful speed directing, we got such classics such as this.
I may be way in the room, avoiding traps laid for a less wary eye.
So yeah, if you couldn't smell the smoke already, this smoldering bag of dog shit was already going up in flames pretty quickly early on. Like, the signs were clearly there. However, my biggest question during the research from this whole topic was, where the fuck was Peter Ganter during all of this? He didn't really do much of anything aside from meddle with Carrie's work. We'll get to that. But aside from that, during production, it seems he didn't really do much of anything except push his toy line on an appropriately ugly blog site. The biggest problem during production, according to Carrie at least, was a real lack of hardware. From Carrie's account, he only had 3 workstations at his disposal and an Alienware machine that he apparently had begged Peter to get so he could edit any finished animation. By the end of 2008, Act 1 was apparently getting close to being wrapped up, and Act 2 was well underway. It seemed things were actually making steady progress, and Carrie was finally getting somewhere. However, despite a decent chunk of the film finished, most distributors just weren't interested in the film. Well, damn, I wonder why. At the same time, despite all of that, despite the fact no one was interested, something interesting happens. Carrie would finally get a decent chunk of Act 2 finished, and eventually had enough VOs and animation to make a proper trailer for the film. With it came a lot of attention. In January of 2009, I'd recorded a voiceover locally here in Arizona for a new trailer, and cut the trailer in a couple of hours right after the VO session. Suddenly, with the new trailer, we were getting a lot of attention. Wow, that's great! I wonder where all this attention's coming from.
Oh, so you think you've seen bad? I don't know who's behind this animated feature, but they are looking for distribution. Desperately seeking distribution. How bad could it be? Check out the trailer. And have a nice day.
Yeah. Mr. Ganter made some contacts and managed to get a few meetings. Most showed interest, but offers were fairly uninspired. It was suggested we turn it into a theatrical feature. I was extremely hesitant and pointed out that this would easily quadruple the work, and we drastically would need more equipment and actual workstations. I got approval on a budget, half of which never materialized, and a workstation with several render boxes were purchased, and I began reworking our not quite half-finished film. It was when MGM made an impressive offer that included a 2,800 theater deal. I was stunned and thrilled. Our little film suddenly had a major release. Now, I have a lot to say about this specific part of the story, but for the sake of not derailing the timeline, we'll put a pin in this for later. All that's important as of right now is MGM supposedly was interested in distributing the film and offered a 2,800 theater release. However, at the cost of the film going theatrical, so would the production's workload. As Carey had already mentioned, the film would require 4 times the amount of work if this was going to be a full-blown theatrical release. On top of the fact that he's the only animator working on the film as of this part of the story, barely any functioning computer equipment, half-assed voiceovers, and no additional budget for retakes, everything was coming together like a recipe for a dubious double-decker dick sandwich. Again, allow me to re-ask this recurring question. Where the fuck was Peter in all of this? Aside from making connections and somehow managing to sign a distribution deal with a shitty movie trailer, there hasn't been much of him present in this story at all. Well, that's about to change. You see, all of the quotes and really all of what's known about the history of this film all comes from the mouth of Carey Howe himself, if that wasn't obvious enough already. But you might be asking where all this information came from specifically. That would be from a website Carey would soon make after production for Freaky Flickers became complicated. Shortly after the MGM deal had been discussed, Carey brought on a close friend to help him with the production of this movie, who Carey simply refers to as Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan was in charge of helping with the film's sound design, as well as helping Carey with editing. Bringing in Carey's friend on board actually made things move at a semi-decent pace. Carey could prioritize animation, while Khan could focus on editing the actual film and any other additional elements of production. With the film going theatrical, however, Carey realized he needed to rework a lot of the movie scenes and textures for it to look on par with an actual animated feature. I managed to rework 30 to 60 seconds most days. The animation wasn't on par with a theatrical release, and the textures and models often wouldn't hold up, so the existing shots were largely redone and at times started from scratch. The film was looking radically better and actually looked on par with films with budgets 10 to 100 times our little film's budget. Hey, that's actually pretty cool. Let's see some of that updated animation, huh?
How about a sardine and peanut butter sandwich? We've got marshmallows.
Jokes aside, the fact that all of this was done by one man is pretty impressive in its own right. You have to remember that all of this was being animated, rigged, and rendered all by himself. Now, would I throw money at this to see it in theaters? No, probably not. Would I invest money in distributing the film to 2,800 theaters nationwide? No. Now that MGM was supposedly getting involved, hardware troubles were the least of Carey's worries, as things would further become complicated with the requirement of the P&A money from the studio. Peter and Carey needed to cough up 250 clams in order for their distribution deal to go through. As you can imagine, that's kind of a massive fucking problem, considering the fact that not even their entire film's budget was half of that. Carey had no idea how they were going to make that kind of scratch, but strangely enough, Peter Ganter assured him that that wasn't an issue. Things moved into early of June 2009, and the both of them only had a few weeks before their P&A deadline was up. If they couldn't scrounge up the scratch in time, MGM would likely back out of their deal. Of course, this made Carey extremely nervous, yet despite the looming deadline, Peter was constantly assuring Carey that he had everything figured out. And then, it happened. On June 9th, 2009, Carey stayed up late one night trying to troubleshoot one of their computers. The constant hardware issues over the last several months were daunting. He had to truck through if he wanted to meet their distribution deadline. Once he finally got the machine operational again, he decided to finally get some rest after pulling an all-nighter. Once he said goodnight to Mr. Khan, he made his biggest mistake yet.
I said goodnight to Mr. Khan, who was editing the film in my living room. I had taken to wearing earplugs due to a noisy neighborhood and the jet engine-like render boxes that were in my kitchen. I passed out a little after noon that day and awoke before 8 p.m. and immediately noticed that things were too quiet. I grabbed a robe and staggered out half asleep into a dark, silent house. The project computers were gone, as were the backup drives in Mr. Khan. I noticed a letter taped to the wall from Mr. Ganter, explaining that the P&A money had fallen through and he was shutting down the film. I collapsed into my chair and was unable to rise for many hours. I put every cent I could for nearly 4 years into the film and maxed out my credit cards. My rented house was being sold, so I needed to move out by the end of the month. I felt violated and in shock. One of my closest friends, Mr. Khan, had apparently turned on me and let my associate take equipment and the files while I slept. He had disappeared back to his home in Martha's Vineyard, and to this day has yet to respond to my phone calls or emails. I had known him for 15 years, and he had just paid his way to come out for the job, so turning Judas was as hard as a blow as losing everything. I had just lost everything.
In one of the most fascinating turn of events, Peter, at some point between the supposed MGM deal and the week of the P&A money's deadline, hired Kahn to steal all the backups and materials from the film while Carey had his back turned. Probably one of the most infamous cases of film theft in the last decade. It's funny to note that for the longest time, people had also associated the same situation to another horribly animated movie, Food Fight. This has since been debunked, but it's still a funny coincidence nonetheless. With all of his computer equipment gone, no money to pay his bills, and barely any food left in his house, Carey became desperate. He rushed to the nearest electronics store and purchased a shitty laptop, the last bit of money he had left, and created the site Freaky Flickers: The Untold Story, which is where most of, if not all of the information from this video is gathered from. Carey's site essentially documents everything explained here today, including the quotes that you've been hearing throughout the video, calling out Peter Ganter's betrayal and supposed breach of their contract. Now, why would Peter do this? Well, I can think of a few reasons. For starters, I'm of the belief that the supposed deal with MGM probably wasn't as legitimate as previously stated. I could be totally wrong here, but I couldn't find any evidence of MGM actually making any kind of statement saying that they would be distributing the film. Perhaps they needed that P&A money before anything became official? No idea. But just looking at everything I've seen from the movie, I just cannot imagine any executive looking at this piece of horseshit and genuinely thinking, yes, I want to put that on the silver screen. For all we know, Peter could have been stringing Carey along, thinking that the movie was going to get the release he so desperately wanted for it. But as soon as he let his guard down, he'd snag back his materials without ever having to confront him directly. He is the sole producer of the project and the owner of the Freaky Flickers brand. As far as Carey is legally concerned, he was simply a contracted hand with a merchandise agreement. You might be thinking, if Peter was so uncertain about the film, why would he dump as much money into it as he did? Well, you have to remember what Carey Howe wrote. He had been putting most of his own money into the project, paying for hardware, using his software licenses, hiring actors. All of that came from his pocket. Peter probably helped somewhat, but judging by his apparent lack of involvement throughout the story, it's pretty clear to me that this wasn't much of a financial loss for him as it was for Carey. You have to remember at the beginning of all of this, Peter started this as a toy line. I'd like to think Carey came to him about the idea of making this into a film, thought it was a good way to give the toys the proper marketing they needed, but in the end, the toys ended up becoming a major flop and just became more trouble than it's worth. Sounds a bit far-fetched, I know, but I mean, so does MGM actually picking this up. So yeah, that's Freaky Flickers: The Untold Story. We still have several assets from the film archived, like character renders and storyboards, but that's really it. Crazy how despite how much work was done on the film, Simon just got cold feet and decided to pull the plug in June. Wait a minute. On June 9th, 2009, I noticed a letter taped to the wall from Mr. Ganter, explaining that the P&A money had fallen through, and he was shutting down the film. On June 9th, 2009, and he was shutting down the film.
On June 9th, 2009.
What the fuck? As previously stated, Carey Howe has essentially been the sole narrator of this tale. Everything I've told you today comes from the Untold Story website, mainly because that's the only tangible information we have from the film. But the more I dig deeper into the story, the more I've begun to come to the conclusion that Carey Howe is a very unreliable narrator. Now, I'm going to go on record saying, to cover my ass, that all of this isn't concrete. Regardless of the true story of Freaky Flickers, we'll never actually really know what happened. We'll never really know the truth. These events happened almost 2 decades ago, so all that I can really do is look at the scattered puzzle pieces and come to my own conclusion. Just take all of that as you will. With that said, what makes me think Carey is an unreliable source? I think the biggest piece of evidence supporting this idea is ironically several contradictory claims about the Untold Story website itself. For starters, let's bring up those storyboards again. I find it strange that despite Carey Howe claiming Peter Ganter canned production that June, that these storyboards would still be made way into the year. The earliest storyboards that I could get my hands on date back to June 20th, 2009 at the earliest. It seems clear to me that the film was still very much alive and in production after the alleged theft, which again contradicts Carey's claim of the P&A money falling through and Peter shutting down the film after the fact. Furthermore, it's interesting to note that Carey had stated, several times I might add, that he and the recently hired Mr. Kahn were the only people working on the film at that point. Once again, these boards tell another story. And speaking of those said storyboards, you might be wondering who actually made them. Well, that answer lies in one Fritz Stryker. I actually looked on their resume, and they still have Hargant? Is that how you pronounce it? Hargant? Okay. Hargant Entertainment listed, Peter Ganter's production company. Strangely enough, they listed it as photography. I'm just sort of left in the dark on this road. Much like a day with SpongeBob, I feel like I'm left with more questions than I am answers. I don't want to sit here and label Carrie as some sort of villain for acting like a victim. He still totally got screwed over by Peter. Yet there's just too many discrepancies in his story for me to really believe it to be gospel. It's probably also important to note that Peter had been reached out to by Bedhead Bernie in his video on Flickers. From Peter's recollection, it sounds like Carrie was more trouble than he was worth in Peter's eyes, and made the decision to sever him from production, rather than just shut down the entire film. Regardless of whether or not the film survived after Carrie's departure, it didn't really last long after, considering the fact that it never came out. Carrie and Peter have since settled this whole debacle out in court, and the fate of the film is pretty much considered dead. Pretty anticlimactic, all things considered, but if there's one thing to learn from internet subjects such as this, that's pretty on par for the course. That does beg the final question, however. What did Peter do with his supposed backups and final animation from the film? This is a lost media channel after all. Are we going to go on an epic quest for that? No, not really. The only person that's going to have it is Peter. But what did he do with those backups? I can think of a few ideas. So folks, what did we learn from all this? What can be taken away from today's internet tale of yesteryear? Never bite off more than you can chew. I feel like regardless of how honest Carrie was throughout all of this, he got way in over his head. His constant overambition for the project, in my opinion, was ultimately its downfall. If Carrie and Peter had just committed to a direct-to-video release, they might have made back a decent chunk of change. Or not, it's anyone's guess. But if that supposed distribution deal with MGM was as legitimate as Carrie says it was, it probably would have been better for them to just stick to their guns and commit to what they wanted to make initially. Or just, not make it at all. Because it looked like fucking garbage. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you like my shit, and I'll see you all next time when I flap my gums yet again about an obscure piece of internet history that's since fallen through the cracks of time. Seriously, how the fuck do you play Freaky Flickers?